Get started now. Tatianna Duncan, Jojipkados, Ki Chalagi, Mvskoke Eldawe, Kusadi, Doaz, Nobashagi Doaz. I'm Tatianna Duncan. I am a Mvskoke Cherokee Native. My tribal town is Kusadi and my clan is Bear. When I say my tribal town is Kusadi, that's where I come from. It's not where I've been. That's part of my allotment story. We appreciate you coming out today in this treacherous weather. A lot of people didn't make it, but I know over in Owasso it was storming a lot and people have lost their power. We lost 3 of our volunteers. Hi. All right. And making it through the graduation traffic. So today we're going to talk a lot about the allotment era, and I'm curious what everyone's experience is. It's a conversation as well as just presentations. If you have questions, just ask, have something to say, comment. It's important. This is history that has been intentionally covered up because even today they don't want to hear it. It can cause a lot of, I don't think it will cause a lot of problems, but they feel like it would. I find it interesting how many titles were quieted when my family was put on the street, but today they protect it by, because they've made legal measures to protect their home, but no one protected our home when we needed it. So we're going to give a brief background. Both JD and I will kind of share our stories. It's going to be short because most of this is going to be you guys taking time to research your ancestors. We have a drawing if you haven't entered. You fill out a card out there in the front if you want to be in it to have an ancestor drawn, because we need somebody we got to research live.
We need volunteers.
Yes. So this, let me see. This history for me, I grew up hearing certain stories, oral history. Everything I think starts with oral history for most of us. I came to the point in my life to where I said, there's no way we'll ever have the answers. I didn't think they existed. And then one day, JD is on the Facebook. I didn't know him, talking about my 3rd great grandfather, Tugabachi. And at the time, I thought Tugabachi was like my 5th or 6th great grandfather, a time long, long ago. But it isn't that far ago. My grandmother was actually on his will, his alleged will, but still. So that's how close in generations we are to this. And I appreciate the work JD's done. He's been doing this for years. I feel like we have people that they hear our stories and they want to run with this, but we're careful how we tell them because it's very personal. It's historical and it's personal. And I don't like it exploited myself, but that's how I guess you get the story told, maybe. So JD, if you want to share some of your experiences. And, oh, wait a minute. You know what? This is me. I'll have a few little slips up. We would like to thank Narcomi Construction for providing our snacks outside.
We'll be taking a snack break. Is it designated time or just people just go?
Well, you can do that if anyone's, blood sugars aren't right, but we are going to have a designated break, maybe after your 1st or 2nd presentation. And then everyone know where the restrooms are, the Chigujis? They're just around the corner or this way?
Let's make a left and then a right.
Okay, yeah. And if the fire breaks out, use the stairs, not the elevator. So this is kind of the topics we're going to go over today. JD's going to tell us a little bit about his family story. He shared a little bit with me. It's very interesting. And are you going to do the policies also?
Yes.
Okay, great. Because they made all the difference. When I started out 7 years ago, I knew nothing. And when I went to research it, I didn't know what I was looking for and I didn't know where to find it. So we've compiled a list to hopefully help your search go more smooth. So it doesn't take you 7 years, And then I will talk about the red flags of the allotment era. I'm not going to suggest that every single one of us had our land stolen, but I think a lot of us did, and they most certainly took advantage of the vulnerable, the children, the elderly people. And I will show you some documents where I see where a lot of us were murdered. And then we'll get into the research. But for now, let's hear from JD.
Little Chickasaw. Can you do the PowerPoint, please?
I really am mad about this. Let me tell you, this is our Lucinda Hickory team. I really am. Yeah. So JD and I came up with this idea because we felt these were stories that needed to be shared and history that needed to be brought up. And I've been working on it for a long time, JD longer. This is my little cousin. She just got her second PhD. And it's good to see the Indigenous people getting their education. I know when I was younger, it wasn't just given that you were going to go to college, let alone, even graduate high school. And at Arquita, some of you might know her, Dr. Gail Justin, she's in New York, and Gano, they're all plank owners. They've all been here since the day we started. So I am horrible here. I think, there we go. And now you can swap them out. Now get out of the way.
Colbert, Chachipkados, Hododolgi, Amalekikados, Ojibova, Unchugo Flacco, Kawita, Amadolwados, Chalage, Mon, Chickasaw, Mon, Mvskoke, Omes. Hello, everybody. My name is JD Colbert, or my introduction, technically we say I am called JD Colbert. I'm from Wind Clan. My tribal town is Kawita. My ceremonial ground is Sacred Ground. And I am Mvskoke Creek, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Citizen Potawatomi. And you're going to kind of get to know my family just a little bit through this presentation, where I'm endeavoring to not only kind of introduce myself and my story, but by extension to introduce a lot of concepts, some databases, and a kind of a general context of how we arrived at this whole allotment business and a lot of the things that happened. And then, of course, as Tanya mentioned, the primary learning objective for us when organizing and conducting this seminar is to share with you the knowledge that we've accumulated as we have researched our family stories, the typical databases that you might go to when and many of you probably have used at least some of these. I think our list is fairly extensive. I didn't want it to be too exhaustive. We tried to narrow it down to the sites that we felt would be most useful for you in doing your family research. And before I begin, of course, I want to acknowledge what Tanya mentioned. Obviously, these are our family stories. My family's, her family, your family. There's a lot of these stories out there. And by the way, the focus is largely going to be on Creek Nation. However, much of what happened at Creek Nation also, by extension, happened at the other big 5 tribes. And one could say Indian country generally, the 600 tribes nationwide. And they're very personal. And for many people, again, as Tanya mentioned, there's a gap in knowledge, and particularly with regard to actually documenting a lot of things that we have this oral history. And by tradition, we are oral historians. We didn't believe in talking papers. There were people in our communities, in our villages, historically, who were the historians, who learned from a very young age and became carriers of the knowledge and then passed it on to the next generation. So we never want to, in any way, demean oral stories. In fact, if anything else, what we want to do is lift them up. That while there might be some ambiguity in these stories, I think at their heart and center for each of our families, there's a great deal of truth. And with that, kind of a caveat of a warning, because these are our family stories, then it makes them very personal, and we can feel the stories. We can feel our ancestors as we trace their footsteps in time and in history. And unfortunately, what many people will find are tragic and traumatic instances of what happened to your ancestors. Murders, forced guardianship, legalized theft, assimilation efforts, being shipped off to boarding school. All these things happened in each of our families. Not all of them, but there's a commonality there. And many people, when you're researching your stories, you will feel anger at what you discovered. You will feel outraged, as you should. And hopefully, we still want to derive some sense of justice for what happened here in this place. When we're not talking about anything far off, we're talking about here, these blades of grass you walked on to get here. That was Creek land, that was Creek ground. And of course, now it's not. So part of in telling my story is also a broader story that I think will resonate with each of you. And again, I hope that throughout, by the end of the day, by the end of our session, that you will be better armed to conduct your own research into your family story. That is the prime directive. That's the prime goal for why we brought folks together today. And by the way, of course, we have a lot of people who don't have electricity. Some have flooding. So obviously it's greatly affected our attendance. It was the response to what we're doing was pretty overwhelming. In which we got this room for 220 people. I was actually afraid we were going to be standing room only. And because of that demand, we will be doing this again and periodically in the future, different locations, but we'll get the word out about that. So with that brief introduction, let me jump into my story. And this is my grandmother, Ellen Perryman. Many of you know the Perryman family. We're kind of known as the first family of Tulsa. And there were a ton of Perrymans. So this was my grandmother. This was my great aunt, Mary Bray. This picture was taken probably about, I don't know the exact date, but I'm going to guess somewhere around 1895, just before the big storm hit, of this cataclysmic transition for our people, of going from a communal way of life, of the Creek Nation owning all of the land, to that land being fractionated, allotted, and then the theft in the aftermath of allotment. So we'll touch on that, but you'll kind of get to know my people, especially my Creek people. And let's see, how do I move to the next page?
I think we need that swapped out.
Is it on the?
Yeah. No, because this one's my. Yeah,
your presentation, sir.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was up. I'm sorry.
I was chewing it up, so I wouldn't forget.
Yeah, that one is the last one. Okay, and then to move to the next page. Okay, and I use this, okay, the mouse. Okay, thank you. I think I got it now. Although me and IT, we've never gotten along, so it's a constant battle. So my story in one of my research, and I hadn't really heard this growing up, but a family incident in May 1922 near Tatianna, Oklahoma. I'll introduce this slide by saying, "Don't you shoot my horse." So, in case you can't read it, orders, this is a news article from the Poto Weekly Sun, June 1, 1922. Orders father off horse so he could slay him without killing the animal. Josh Colbert, my great uncle, Chickasaw Indian residing near Tatianna, alleged to have murdered his parents. It was really my Chickasaw grandfather, Edmund Colbert, not the father and the mother. Anyway, in the presence of younger brother who owns the equine. "Don't you shoot my horse," shouted the younger brother of Josh Colbert, Chickasaw Indian, as the latter aimed a shotgun at his father who was astride the horse. Well, family stories. I hadn't heard this one. Even my mom was surprised. And okay, so to finish the story, apparently Edmund Colbert, my Chickasaw grandfather, did get off the horse, and his son, Josh Colbert, my uncle, leveled the shotgun at him and shot him and killed him. Presumably, he didn't hit the horse. And so some years ago, I was doing some work for Chickasaw Nation, and I was doing some work on a project that had a lot of publicity around it. So the Governor Anatobie's press secretary was in all these meetings with us and writing press releases, that sort of thing. So one day we're on the phone on the subject matter, one of the conference call, and waiting for other people to join in. It was just her and I, Kay Colbert, and she's about the same age as me. So I told her this story, and when I finished, she gasped. She's like, "Oh my God, I know that story. I've heard that story all my life. That was my grandfather that shot and killed your grandfather." Oh, all right, Kay, this will not stand. I'm coming down for blood revenge. Well, interestingly, and one of the reasons I tell the story is that once we kind of got over our shock, she asked me, "So what did you always hear this dispute was about between father and son?" And I said, and the article references this, and later on, that the son had been basically sharecropping the father's land, and there was some dispute about it was bad land or didn't give him enough provisions to do his sharecropping, whatever. And Kate was silent, so I could tell she had heard something different. So I said, "Well, what did you hear this dispute was about?" And she said, "I always heard that it was about another woman." And I was like, "Oh, that's absolutely true," because my grandmother, Ellen Perryman, you just saw, in 1922, Ellen is about 40, and some reports have it that she was actually living in Edmund Colbert's house with his then wife, Martha Colbert, and their 5 kids who were then in their 20s. But Ellen was under the same roof and was pregnant with my mom, who was born like 3 months after this incident. So I always tell people, for me, the moral of the story is thank God for our polygamy, or I wouldn't even be here. It's Indian country. What are you going to do? So, yeah, and I'm sure you know this, and we'll talk. And by the way, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to raise your hand or throw a pen at me or something, get my attention. And when we do talk about doing this research, this is an absolute necessity. The very first step you have to take is to trace your ancestors. There's no other way around it. You have to, like law enforcement says, we need names. We need names. And we can start running them through these databases that we're going to discuss here in a little bit. But we got to have names. Now, for me, it's pretty easy. I only have to go back 2 generations. So I got my father and mother. I only have to go back to grandparents. And each one of these, Ellen Perryman, she's Mvskoke Creek. Edmund is Chickasaw. Grandmother, Florence, she was Cherokee. She was Citizen Potawatomi. And Fred Taylor Sr., he was Cherokee. So there is where I get my 4 bloodlines, native tribal bloodlines. So I didn't have to go back here. Some other folks are going to have to go back another generation. And, sadly, the paper trail for Indian country isn't terribly extensive, unlike our white brethren, before there are many kinds of records kept, and Indian country, not so much. I guess I'll introduce that later. But yeah, this has to be the first step. And some folks maybe are not just interested in documenting and finding out more about their family history and their family story, but some people, and I would guess perhaps many these days, are doing this research so that they can become a tribal citizen. And for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure just looking around the room, most of you do know this, but at the end of the day, if that is a person's goal to obtain tribal citizenship, then the gold standard is this, CDIB, Certificate Degree of Indian Blood. How many people in here are familiar with the CDIB? Some of you carry it, I'm sure. Yeah, okay. So I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but as you know, the CDIB purports to tell you what tribes you are and what your blood quantum is. And if you're more than one tribe, then generally it's going to list, like if this person was, I don't know, half Cherokee and half Creek, it would show 1/2 Creek, 1/2 Cherokee, and their total blood quantum. And this will be something I don't want to get off the beaten path, but I think we likely will come back to in our discussion, particularly when we're looking at examples. You know how when you get on a website or something and this little box pops up and says, you click here, I am not a robot. It's happened to everybody. Do you understand how dystopian that is? That a robot is asking us humans to prove that we're human. It's crazy. Well, the same thing happened to our people, the Big Five, especially through the Dawes Commission, which again, we'll talk some more about. But basically, the Dawes Commission, they came out here, basically a bunch of white people from Washington, D.C. came out here, the Indian Territory, to tell us whether we were tribal or not and how much blood we were. In my search of like Mvskoke Creek history and records, prior to the Dawes Commission, I have not seen any Creek records that have mentioned in any way, shape, or form blood quantum. Suddenly, Dawes comes out here and starts assigning us pedigrees. And it's very much a social construct of how you look or how you handled yourself. It's nuts. It's truly nuts. And we know that blood quantum, this first introduction into America, was in Virginia. And it was a way of excluding the Virginia tribes from land ownership, from state citizenship, from U.S. citizenship. And so it was very exclusionary. Now it's like blood quantum suddenly, overnight, becomes the be-all and end-all of being Native. It's a crazy system. It gets even crazier, too, in terms of federal Indian law, that we all know, I think, that the tribes, like any sovereign government, can establish criteria for citizenship. Whatever that criteria might be, that's up to them. Point being, it doesn't have to be Dawes. But when we start talking about that, people kind of freeze up like, oh, what are we going to do without Dawes? Oh my God, we can't do without Dawes. And the records are so flawed. And we know too, while I'm preaching to the choir, that a lot of people who should have gotten on the rolls didn't. And a lot of people who should not have been on the rolls got on. It's a crazy system that we live with. And the final thing I would say about that, keep in mind, the Dawes rolls, the Dawes Commission to the 5 civilized tribes, their job fundamentally was to fractionate the land, to allot it to the qualifying natives to receive an allotment, and I could add, so that ultimately that land could be stolen from the natives. But to do this, like in the case of Creek Nation, we had 3 million acre reservation. Ultimately, Dawes enrolled 20,000 creeks, allotted it generally in 160 acre tracts to the citizens. Well, to do that, of course, it's like, okay, well, commission, put yourself in their shoes for a moment. They're like, okay, we got this job, and Congress and the general public want us to get this over with very quickly so that people can get on with the business of stealing the land. But who do we allot the land to? Creek Nation didn't have enrollment records, nothing like we have today, not even close. And even then, what little they had, if you want to call them records, citizenship records, they were by tribal town. We had 44 tribal towns. And these citizenship records from each tribal town, it might simply have been like today when you signed in, to come sign it to attend this seminar. Something similar back in the day might be people who showed up to receive some provisions of food or something, and they signed up like, okay, so that's our citizenship. Really? What about the people who didn't show up that day? Anyway, very crazy stuff. And so the commission, of course, they had to know, well, who do we allot this land to? Ultimately, Congress they took that power away from the tribes. They gave it to the commission and said, you make the records, you make the citizenship list, and then let's get on with the business of allotment. And so there was this very frenzied effort that the Dawes Commission, and they were under a great deal of pressure, particularly from Congress, who kept messing with the Dawes Commission budget. And then from the boomers out here, statehood, statehood, statehood. So we put ourselves in that mindset that this was supposed to be an expedited process. We got to get this over with. Who cares who's on the roll? Just allot the land so we can get busy stealing it. That was really the ethos that was happening at this time, and that we today have to live with the aftermath of all of that. So anyway, so yeah, CDIB, and then you could take your CDIB, which we know is usually issued by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Some tribes have compacted that function from the BIA, so they'll do the CDIB, and then if you meet the citizenship criteria, they will issue you the gold standard, your tribal citizenship card. This case, I don't know about you guys' tribe, is interesting. This card is accepted by U.S. Customs for international travel. Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Bermuda. So we're making progress in extending and enlarging our sovereignty. Okay, so, whoops, it's the wrong button. So as I mentioned before, I'm in telling my story, I'm also trying to give you some historical framework in which perhaps to better understand your story. We'll forget about all these guys out here because our focus is Creek Nation, by extension, the old Indian Territory. And you can see basically from this map that essentially there was no private ownership of land in Indian Territory prior to Dawes. Tribal government owned all the land. And according to our customs and our tradition, let's say if you were Mvskoke Creek, you could go anywhere in this 3 million acre reservation and build yourself a log cabin, plant some fruit trees, dig a well, make a home. And while you didn't have what we all are too familiar with today, this thing called a land deed, those did exist, you could go anywhere and establish your home. And the community, the tribe, recognized your right of occupancy to that place that you had settled, even to the point where, of course, you could pass it on to your children and then their children. So there's big, very strong emphasis on the communal way of life. And that concept of no private ownership of land, I don't know if any of you have seen this. Eventually you will. Everyone in here familiar with abstracts? The land abstract? Yeah, so these abstracts on a particular piece of property, they're generally held at title companies who do title work and title research and determine whether someone has a good title to maybe pass on to sell that land to somebody else. So if you, like, for example, you sell your land to somebody and you give them a deed, and they're going to take that deed down to the county courthouse and file it. and then it winds up in here. It just adds to all these documents. So basically, this is a book of everything that's been filed of record on a particular piece of property. This one I brought just for example. It turns out I just went down to title company and said, hey, I need this for my presentation. And I know the owner of the company said, hey, just take this one, and looked at it. Oh my God, this is David Hodge. Many of you probably know David Hodge or of his name, the Hodge family. Got his allotment down. Well, you may have perhaps ever been to Hodges Bend, which sadly burned down a couple of years ago, right on the eastern edge of downtown. This is where his allotment was, and he's famous for translating the 4 Gospels of the Bible from English to Creek, and the little white church out in Broken Arrow was where he worshiped. Anyway, I was like, wow, I got a big name here. Anyway, if you look at this and any abstract, to underscore my point about no private ownership of land, the first document you'll find is a warranty deed from United States of America to Creek Nation. That deed was dated 1852, and it was signed by the historically unremarkable U.S. President Millard Fillmore. Although I like his name, but the guy didn't do much. In any event, then that was 1852. The next document you will find in these abstracts, the very next one will be, guess what? The allotment deed. Generally, those were issued in 1901, 1902, sometimes later, but there was a whole flurry of them done about that time, particularly here in the Tulsa area. So imagine 50 years went by from the first document to the second document. 50, it's pretty incredible. But again, it goes back to this notion that we, tribally, our culture was communal, and thus the land was owned communally. Then in the context, we get the allotments, the fractionization. This is an allotment map me and another guy put together. Some of you might be familiar with Hastings, a 1910 township map. Given that there were 20,000 creek allotments covering 3 million acres, we couldn't possibly build a map that big. We'd have to put it on the side of a skyscraper or something. So in this case, we just narrowed it down. So this is Admiral. Then this becomes Edison, I believe, or Easton. Central part of downtown, original part of downtown right here. And then you can begin to see these 160 acre squares. One red square is 640 acres. That's divided into 4 parts of 160 acres each. So the fractionization happens, and it happens really fast. And again, keep in mind the pressure the commission was under as people agitated for statehood and putting the plow to the land and all those kinds of things. So that's what you'll find when you begin your search. Once you find your name and you know what you're looking for, and you locate the land, which we'll talk about in a minute, you'll first, and you pull up an abstract, you'll find the patent. It's called a patent deed, United States of America to Creek Nation. The next deed you'll find, or the next instrument you'll find, is the allotment deed. And generally you'll find 2 of them. For some reason, well, the original allottees in Creek Nation, they got one deed for 120 acres called surplus land, and another deed to 40 acres called the homestead. And legally, there were more restrictions on the homestead than the 128 surplus. So you'll find 2 deeds. And certainly I found that on mine. I'll show you in a minute. So I want to reemphasize this notion of your family tree, and you've got to go back to the 1890s, should do, to some ancestor, some relative who was alive and kicking in the 1890s. I say that because the Dawes Commission, its enrollment, its list of citizens that they created generally didn't really start happening until about 1898, 1899, 1900. So if you go back to the 1890s, then start going forward, looking at these various databases, hopefully you will find an ancestor you might be looking for. And again, I've been through this process. Out of all the databases, and some of you, how many of you have used the DAWS rolls, the online? Okay, perfect. I kind of like the one at Oklahoma Historical Society. There's various websites that have that information, but I particularly like the Oklahoma Historical Society. And one of the things to be aware of is name spelling. There wasn't, like I mentioned, there wasn't a whole lot of accuracy back in the day. And of course, there weren't any birth certificates, or there were very few. And then we had the matter, of course, of many of our ancestors who had traditional Mvskoke names. Like, for example, I think we all know, and there might even be a Mvskoke in the room. But Mvskoke is Mvskoke Creek, Figi Sagoat, Figi heart, Sagoat without, heartless. It was a warrior's title, heartless warrior. Well, Figi Sagoat becomes anglicized to Mvskoke. So point being, you have to be aware of that as you're doing search. So it's best to do variant spellings. Like if you come across Nellie, is it Nellie or is it Nelly? You have to keep trying and think, okay, how else can I chop up the spelling of this particular name or ancestor? The point being, don't give up on the first try. Keep after it. Just try to use variations as you're doing your research. And, oops, God, I keep hitting the wrong button. So if you're successful and you get a hit, you'll find something like this. This is known as the Dawes census card. And keep in mind, again, there were about 20,000 creeks. And for the Big Five as a whole, there were about 101,000 people who received allotments, who became citizens of their tribe and then received their allotments. That's a lot of paper pushing and being under a lot of pressure. But so they created these cards, and here's my family again. My grandma, Ellen Perryman, my aunt, Mary Bray, and my great-grandma, Vicey Bray. This is card number 158. So what they did, with some exception, but they would create these cards of families. So each family would get a card. And I find it interesting because my family was very, very traditional. And I rather imagine very much opposed to all of this, as much of Creek Nation and much of the Big Five were. I think you'll probably know Chittohajo, the Crazy Snake Rebellion, Redbird Smith, the Four Mother Society. All of these banded together to try to stave off allotment. Obviously, it didn't work. But anyway, I don't know how many cards they created total, but you would get a roll number. So these numbers I know well: 569, 570, and 571. There were 20,000 creeks that received roll numbers, and my family was among the first. And I still haven't quite figured that out, because I've always sensed that they were resistant. In fact, in just a minute, I'm going to show you a manifestation of that resistance by my grandma, Vicey Bray. But if you're lucky, eventually you'll arrive at this place, a census card with, again, the roll number, name, family relationships, sex, blood quantum. We've already talked about that. They say tribal enrollment, but again, I think that's using the term pretty loosely, but we'll go with what's on here for a moment. Our tribal town, Coweta, and then her father, Slafichi, who was deceased at this time. He was from Casita, tribal town. And then her mother, Betsy Marshall, who had passed, also from Coweta. And then the two sisters had a different father. William Bray. He was known as Whistling Willie Bray. And then Wright Perryman, Ellen's mom. So this is the kind of information that you will get and hopefully be able to document essentially through that DAWS search. Any question?
Is this the Perryman's family that's connected to the Adams and Hartwells?
I don't know. You know, we're a huge family, and my family story is somewhat unique in that my mother was an only child. And as we know, her father was killed by her brother when she was in the womb. And then my grandma, Ellen Perryman, died when my mom was 13, and she got immediately shipped off to boarding school. So my family is unusually small at a time. For example, on my Cherokee side, that family had 10 kids that we know of, maybe more. This side that I was raised with the Chickasaws and the Creeks, is very, very small. So I think there's a possibility, there's probably a good possibility, but I couldn't answer that definitively.
Only ask because I have a great second, third grade was Mahala Perryman. She's kind of like Louis Perryman and Blake's. I remember, but I know that they were part of the township connected to Thomas J. Adams. She was married to him.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with any connection between the Adams family and the Perrymans. Okay, so how many of you have seen your census card? Okay, so some of you are familiar with, some of it's kind of new. So then I'll show you on my, this is my Chickasaw side, and this is my father who got shot and killed, his then wife Martha, Josh the gunman, and the son Ben. Basically the same information. One caveat, when you see a census card, don't take it as exhaustive, because it's not, and I'll show you. For me and my Colbert family, there were births during this whole process of allotment and enrollment. Originally, Congress said you had to be alive on April 1, 1899 to get an allotment, and to get tribal citizenship, to get an allotment. But then they went and changed it, and they started adding newborns. So to the record I just showed you, my grandfather and his then wife had another kid. So you see Salina there, information, her father Edmund, mother Martha. So point being, if you find a census card and you don't find your ancestor, keep looking.
Equally, you'll see people died. You could die April 2nd, 1899, and you would have still gotten an allotment.
Right.
And there was a lot of corruption with that. But yeah, and you look well on the other ones, you'll see number 1, number 2, and it'll tell you who died, and even name changes or this name on this census card. It has a lot of information on it.
Right.
Well, some of them do.
Phil?
Yeah, JD, where are the original documents kept?
Well, originally, these all were housed at what was called the Union Agency in Mvskoke. And that was the headquarters of DAWS and the BIA superintendent. So all the records were there. And then at some point, I don't know exactly when, but these originals, to the extent that, well, the originals do exist, they were transferred to the National Archives in Fort Worth, which is another resource source that we're going to talk about. Highly recommend a trip down there in your search. That answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. And then finally, this is yet another child, Holman. He was known as Smokey. He was born later, so he has his own card. So if you were looking for Holman, you didn't see him on the family card, the initial one, don't give up. Keep looking. Also in my family, I'll come right back to you. My family, it turns out, and I didn't know this till recently, but Edmund Colbert, in sometime 1903, I think, impregnated a girlfriend, and they had a child, Jesse Colbert. And so he got enrolled, and you can probably see, well, you can't see it here. This references number 11, which is number 11 up here, Jesse Colbert. And it says illegitimate child born December 23rd, 1901, enrolled June 30, 1902. So even illegitimate kids, not always, but they definitely could have their own card. So you just never know what you're going to find. You kind of keep plowing away at your research. One thing leads to another, and hopefully you'll find your family history. This is the application for enrollment. So part of the process was the Dawes Commission to come in and apply for your allotment. And this is my family again. There's Vicey Bray, Mary Bray, Ellen Perryman. One of the interesting things, not just to let you know that you'll likely stumble across something like this, but also you can probably see down here, there's an X mark. Ooh, that's a red flag. Big time. They couldn't read or write or probably speak the English language. The concept of land ownership, very foreign to traditional people. Very, very foreign concept. So you're trying to get used to that. Like, okay, wait, how can I own Saturn? What? The planet Saturn or Pluto? This is crazy stuff. Who deals with this? Well, and unfortunately, there's a lot of this in the records with the original enrollees and allottees, the X mark. Someone wrote her name, but presumably, we don't know this for a fact either, that she put her X mark. Typically, the full-bloods, the traditionalists didn't speak the language, particularly at this time, 1890s, early 1900s. So there were two ways to somewhat, I guess you could say, legally have a substitute for a signature. One was an X mark and one was a thumbprint. So you'll see that quite a bit throughout all of these records. And unfortunately, we're going to come back to this notion of an X mark, how the original allottees were very often swindled, taken advantage of, their unfamiliarity with the concept of land ownership, the inability to speak English, to read it, to write it. There was massive abuse. In fact, the grand historian, certainly Oklahoma's finest historian, and many think America's finest historian ever, Angie DeBow, in her book, The Still the Waters Run, The Betrayal of the Five Civilized Tribes. She's an exquisite academic, an unbelievable researcher, and she often describes this whole period as a grand conspiracy to defraud and to steal native oil and valuable lands. And she's absolutely right. Everyone was in on it. The county judges especially, the bankers, the storekeepers, the funeral homes that would charge back then $50,000 for a casket. A massive amount of corruption was going on. So anytime you see this X mark, be prepared for what you're next going to find, because it's not going to be pretty. Fortunately for my family, well, we'll show it in a minute, but fortunately for my family, we still have the 40-acre homestead of my grandmother in the family. And it's kind of like southeast of Morris. Anyway, it's basically just farmland. Thank God oil didn't get struck on that land, or we wouldn't have it today, and I might not be here. And in fact, as a quick side, again, we'll get into this, but I was thinking about this morning, that for most people, most Americans, if someone drilled an oil well on your land and they hit a gusher, you'd be partying for a week at least. Oh my God, I'm rich, yeah. When oil was struck on native lands, natives feared it, and many took off and left because they knew it likely meant death. Certainly they were going to get their land stolen, but they feared it. So imagine that. The rest of the world celebrates, and we're paralyzed with fear over the same incident. It's just a crazy story. And again, I mentioned that to you as somewhat preparation for what you're likely to find as you dig and you dig. This is, I don't know that they did this in every case, but there would be the allottee would kind of be interrogated. There was some basic questions. You probably can't see this, but they'll ask, what's your name? Vice Bray. Are you a citizen of Mvskoke Nation? Yes. What town do you belong to? Coweta. And so they would ask them, like, is there a house on any of these lands? This case, yes. And where her and her daughter, how much land is cultivated? About 50 acres plowed. This is also telling down here, this very last question, and it gets back to the trickeration, the theft that the dominant society did to the natives. Down here it says, not selecting in the interest of any cattleman. Well, this happened a lot. There were, before allotment, before the fractionation, when the Creek government owned all the land, they frequently would lease it out land to cattlemen. Initially, it was the Texas Trail from Fort Worth, Texas, going up present day Highway 69 into Kansas and Missouri to sell the cows. Well, of course, they needed to be fed along the way. So they would get these leases to graze. And then eventually the cattlemen kind of just took over that particular area. Well, if a cattleman had, like, I don't know, 50,000 acres, obviously they're not going to give that up without a fight. They've been there. They feel it's theirs, even though they don't quote own it. So when it came to allotment time, they would prey upon natives who couldn't speak or read or write the language, and they would arrange for them to go pick 160 acre allotments that was basically encompassing their cattle ranch. Hence this question, you're not acting at the behest of any cattleman. So again, something else that was pretty frequent. One of the things I like that gives me some insight into the personality of my grandmother, these last couple of questions where I sense some resistance to the process. And I also thankfully sense some attitude that she had toward the Dawes Commission. They asked her, will you accept these lands for yourself and your two daughters as your final allotments? Yes, sir. We'll have to do it. Then they ask, well, will you do it? And she says, I will have to do it. And then, do you mean by that you're willing to do it? Answer, if I was not willing, I would not do it. That's hardly the same as saying, oh yeah, no problem. I'm all in. I sense some resistance. So, and again, I share that little piece with you because hopefully in your research, you'll come across something like this and you get a little sense of the personality of your ancestors. Here's our remaining 40 acres. It's encompassed by this tree line down near Morris, Oklahoma. Websites. When you find your allotments, it'll be a legal description. So, and there's websites will show you, if you don't know, to enter the legal description so you can actually locate where it's at. And I used one of the websites to, I've been down to this land many times. I know where it's at, but I wanted a visual image to share with you. So I just used that website to convey this location. It's actually, many of you familiar with Dewar, I'm sure. Anyway, it's just right up in this area. And on the same time, it was very, very common, not surprisingly, for families to select adjoining allotments. So here's my family again. Ellen Perryman with her 160. This is the homestead part that we still have. Her mother, Vice Bray, and then my aunt, Mary Bray. So they controlled 480 acres. There's a family story that I'm still, and I believe I can largely document this, that Mary Bray married a white man and that he was instrumental in selling these allotments as well as the 120 surplus acres. I'm still trying to, that's the kind of the family legend and story. I'm pretty sure once I dig into an abstract, I can kind of pretty much verify that story. But anyway, so your family likely will have selected adjoining allotments. And this is my grandpa, Edmund Colbert, near Gertie. Where is Gertie, you may ask? Well, this is Allen. Ada would be right over here. And interestingly, also, keep in mind, another thing to know, my grandfather was full-blood Chickasaw, but right about in here is the dividing line between the Chickasaw Reservation and the Choctaw. So he's way over the line. That is not uncommon, that there were Chicks who selected allotments in the Chalk country or Chalks who selected allotments in the Chickasaw country. Part of that goes back to the historical ties. So don't be surprised if maybe you find your records, your ancestor, and like, wait a minute, that's not in Creek Nation, that's over in Cherokee. How can that be? Well, it happened. This again, I won't go over anything on this, this is similar questionnaire that was applied to the allottees, applying for an allotment, just asking his name, Edmund Colbert, and kind of unremarkable. This one is like a fill in the blank. The other one I showed you was just questions. I don't know if those were a standard set of questions where my grandma was giving them some attitude, but this is obviously a fill in the blank form. So they did this in a variety of ways. And you can see here, there's no X mark. So clearly my grandfather knew English and could read and write. So I'm going to end this portion of the presentation going back to where I began with this notion that we can't proceed, you can't proceed without doing this research. And for many of you, maybe it won't be as daunting as you think because, I don't know, maybe there was a white mother or white father. Well, obviously then you can exclude all these guys for the most part. Again, I mentioned earlier, many people got on the rolls who never should have gotten on. Shall I say it? Enough about Governor Stitt. Let's move right on. Yeah, Bill?
Yeah, were the allotments surveyed by the government and also delineated tribal areas?
Yes. Of course, the tribal reservations, the exterior boundaries were established at the time they got moved out here on the Trail of Tears. But then within that, yes, and that was part of the Dawes Commission's role was, oh my God, I forget how many, I think there's maybe 20 million acres in the old Indian territory, something like that. It's a lot of land. So they had teams and teams of surveyors going out to survey and putting together the grid so that ultimately it could be allotted. And I personally am very sympathetic and I'm probably more than that, supportive of the resistance of the tribes to this whole process, particularly Chittohajo, and like I said, Redbird Smith, Four Mother Society. So one of the things they did was when the resistance caught a surveyor out in the woods, they would tar and feather that dude and put him on his horse and send him back home. The commission absolutely hated, obviously, the resistance. And there's a great story. I don't know, anyone in here heard of the world's richest Indian, Jackson Barnett? No? Well, it's fast. It's great. There's a book. It's a great book. Heaps Creek. And he was a snake. And the Snakes wouldn't have anything to do with this process. In fact, they punished other tribal citizens for going along with this. And so the Snakes wouldn't come in to select their allotment. That was part of the process. And like I said, you saw the contiguous allotments. Well, the Snakes wouldn't come in to select their allotment. So the commission decided they were really mad at these guys. It caused them all kinds of headache. Like, okay, what are we going to do? We've got to give them allotments. Somebody said, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we give them the most barren, God-forsaken land in Creek Nation down there near Drumright? Okay, great idea. A couple of years later, they strike oil, and all of those guys become fabulously rich. At least on paper, what wasn't stolen from them. So, questions, comments, hostilities? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I was going to get back to you.
Well, I have one of my favorites, and I just want to say something about an X. It's a letter from the Department of Interior Affairs, but by the address, it like has a little X by it, but it's a court document. I'm like, so that does that mean they probably went back? It's them telling them to recommend to sell the land for like $50 an acre, but it has an X by it.
Is that X on a like a warranty deed or a?
No, it's a court document.
A court document, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the same thing. They would.
Commissioner of the Five Civilized Tribes.
The system accepted X marks as a legal signature, and presumably that you knew what you were doing through that document, which we know wasn't the case. Yes, ma'am.
So is that how a lot of land got stolen? Is because X are the thumbprint? For example, if I had land, my name is Tracy, but Sally Sue knew how to write my name, and she really put her name and I put the X. Is that how it really got stolen?
Yeah, that's one of the techniques. Absolutely. Oftentimes they were taking advantage of the lack of the knowledge of English language, but also the lack of business affairs generally relating to this foreign concept of owning land. And in fact, this abstract that I picked up just haphazardly, I didn't know, David Hodge, it only took me to flip through like the first 2 or 3 pages, like, okay, here's the patent deed, here's the allotment deed. And this, when you get one of these abstracts, the very next document that gets filed after the allotment, oh, that is so telling. And it's a huge indictment of the system. In this case, the allottee had a daughter or a daughter-in-law, I can't remember now. Anyway, couldn't speak, read, or write English. And this is on another property near David Hodges. But anyway, and so her daughter convinced her, or daughter-in-law, that, hey, since you don't know anything about leases and land titles and whatever, you can't speak or read or write the language, sign this power of attorney. I'll handle everything for you, and I'll collect the monies, and I'll give it to you. And the allottee signs with her X mark. 2 years later, she's thankfully, with an attorney, she goes to court to have that power of attorney set aside, and that the daughter or daughter-in-law knew full well she couldn't speak, read, or write the language. She didn't understand business matters, and basically her own daughter or daughter-in-law had taken advantage of her. And okay, you'll see this too in the power of attorney document that where this allottee, this woman, native woman who didn't speak the language, where she was granting power of attorney to this daughter or daughter-in-law, there had to be witnesses to make it legally sound. So there was a witness there named W.C. Armstrong. 30 days after that transaction, the daughter sells the land to that witness. I mean, this is just how the grand conspiracy, like everybody was in on it. It's like, and again, I hate to say it, but it's so true. When you delve into your research, you're likely going to find stuff like this. And Tanya's going to go over a lot of the red flags that we see. The X mark is definitely one of those. A guardianship is another. Power of attorney. They use the system, quasi-legal, to make these transactions quasi-legal.
And without knowing the story you're talking about, might not have been the daughter. It could have been a guardian. I know because that happened in our case. They had Thomas Hickory sell his interest in Jenny's land to the children. And that way there's no adults in charge and guardian has all control. So it might have been part of the, scam. I don't know that.
Well, in this case, because when they tried to rescind, which they did, when they tried to rescind the power of attorney, it mentions in the petition and the pleadings specifically, my daughter knew this. So in this case, it was.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
What document would I look for to find out the legal description of that allotment? Where would I find that?
We're going to go through all that.
Yeah, but actually you will find it on the allotment deed.
In
And-
the abstract?
Yes, but
Okay,
yeah,
so unfortunately, the building I live in was built in the 60s. And it was apartments, and then in the late 70s, early 80s, it was sold to condo. So I got my abstract because I live in that building as an owner.
Mhm.
It started with the sale of that from renters to condos.
Mm.
It did not go back any further than that. So I'm kind of doing through the back door, trying to figure it
That's
out.
interesting. Yeah, because it should.
I know, I went to the title company and talked to them about it, and they're like,
So-
yes, pay us more money and we'll do that research for you.
One thing to keep in mind, some of these abstracts there's so much that's been filed of record. There's 3 or 4 books. So you have to make sure you have all of them.
Okay.
And it's got to start with that patent deed. When you have that patent deed, you've got you're going back to square one.
Okay.
Yeah, so it may be that they didn't give you because I find that hard to believe that there's nothing of record before, 1960 or whatever?
Yeah.
Go.
If you go down to the county clerk of whatever county the property is located in, all the papers and documents in the abstract will be in the county.
Right,
And
Yeah.
Tulsa County has theirs online.
Yeah.
Hard to read, but they're
Yeah.
online.
exactly. Yes, back in the back.
How do you go about finding the story? And also, how do you find out what was like buildings, apartments? How do you go about finding it?
So that's what we're going to go through the research process here in a little bit. And it is through the documents and newspaper articles. And for a lot of it, it starts with oral history. I don't know what your oral history is, but even like the interview that JD showed us, the allotment interview, you find a lot of information on that. They tell you what kind of land, was there a house, sometimes they'll mention other people's names. Well, so-and-so rented it, yeah.
Right.
But we're going through the research process here in a little bit. If you want to,
Yeah,
so
should
we
we,
can move on.
do you take a break or?